Hey everybody, it's Misty. Welcome back to Quilty Pleasures. I hope you are happy and healthy, and I hope you've had a chance to come and pick up a kit from the public library. So today we are going to begin piecing our 9-patch together. So you will need all of your little squares of fabric. You will need your thread. Now your thread's on a bobbin. I still have some left on the spool. You will need the needle to do your sewing. You probably will need some scissors to cut your thread and a pencil. If you've got a ruler at home, that'd be handy. And if you have some pins, that's great. If you don't have any, you can use the safety pins that came in your kit. Those will work fine. You may not even need them. I probably won't use them, but you might if you want to hold your squares together securely while you're hand sewing. All right, I am going to show you guys how to lay out your pattern. All right, we're going to get started by laying out our squares. So originally, Miss Chelsea and I had in mind that we would use the red ones as kind of the main focal point. And then we would match the colors of the other squares with colors that are within that red fabric pattern. So you can arrange these any way you want to. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine. That's completely up to you how you want your squares to look. But for mine, I kind of like this pattern with the dark gray one in the middle. I think it's fun. So once you have these laid out, we're going to start with just the first row. All right, you're going to turn your top square onto your middle square. And then I like to make sure all of my seams are exactly 1/4 of an inch. This makes sure that your square will go together well. So you can just take a pencil and lightly mark where the 1/4 of an inch seam would be. And this is not going to show up once you get your squares sewn together. And this gives you a nice line to sew on. That way you can make sure you have equal seams. All right. All right, so after you've laid out your squares, you're going to begin by threading your needle. And that's just sliding the thread right through the eye of the needle. And then you're just going to tie a knot in one end. And that's just going to be done by simply looping it around, pulling it through, and tying your knot. Now, I like to double and sometimes triple tie. That way, there's a good little nub on there to keep it from going through my fabric. All right, so after you've done that, you are ready to begin sewing. We're going to take our needle and thread, make sure our squares are lined up evenly, and we're just going to begin to sew. So you'll take your thread, push it through the fabric. I like to do it like this, where I can kind of see my stitch on my fabric, and then do a couple stitches. That way I know my stitches look even. And then I'm going to pull my thread through the fabric. And I'm going to continue doing this until I reach the end of these squares. All right, I'll be back as soon as I finish sewing. All right, as you can see, I have sewn these 2 squares together. All my stitches are right through here. Now to end, it's very simple. We're gonna just tie a knot just like we did at the beginning, at the end of our string. We're going to bring the loop down as close as we can and tighten that knot on the fabric. It's just a simple little loop, and it's going to give you a nice little knot like we had at the beginning of our fabric. And then you'll just cut the tail off, and you have sewn together your first 2 squares. So now I'm going to lay them out like they were, and I'm going to take my bottom square, fold it up towards the middle. I'm going to mark it again because I like having that guide. It makes it so much easier to sew my block together when I know exactly where my 1/4 of an inch seam is. Now on a sewing machine, you would probably have a 1/4 of an inch foot attachment. I know I do it on mine at home, but when I'm hand sewing, I don't have that. And I like to know where my seam is. Now I know there are some that hand sew enough, they kind of can eyeball and guess where a 1/4 of an inch seam is, but I want mine to be exactly that 1/4 of an inch. So you should still have enough thread left already on your needle that you can just tie a couple knots and get started on the second section. All right, after you have your needle and thread tied and ready again, we're going to start the same way we did on the last block. Start on the right side. We're going to put our needle through and look at our stitches as we go along, and we're just weaving the needle in and out of the fabric, and it's going to create that seam that we need. All right, so once again I have finished sewing my seam on this side, and I'm just going to take my thread, loop around, and tie a knot to anchor that seam where it won't come out. All right, and I'm going to trim it. And then we have the first row completed, and I'm going to show you how to iron it. All right, if you have an iron and an ironing board at home, this will be super simple. If not, on the next one, I will show you a neat technique that you can use without having an iron. And we're just gonna iron our seams away from the red. So we're just gonna have the red nice and flat in the middle, and we're gonna iron the green and the yellow flat. And this is gonna make sure when we have it ready to piece together that all of our seams will meet nicely and they'll lay flat and it won't look bad. All right, so it is ironed, and we're going to move on to row number 2. All right, so we have completed our first row. We're going to move on to the middle row, or row number 2. I'm just going to lay these to the side, and this is the same process that we just did. We're going to pull down that top piece, lay it flat on the gray. I'm going to measure my 1/4 of an inch seam. One reason I did choose pencil to mark my seam is because pencil washes out really well. If you use an ink pen, sometimes the ink will bleed, and you don't want it bleeding into your other fabrics and ruining your pretty knot patch. So you will get your thread. If you still have enough left on the needle to go ahead and start, that's great. Tie your knot at the end And it's just a simple knot where you loop it and pull it through. No bows or anything like that. And then you're ready to begin again. And you're going to start at the edge. Bring your needle in. Bring a little bit through. And then once again, I like seeing my stitches on my needle like this, so I know that I kind of keep them evenly spaced. But remember, even if your stitches are not perfect, there is no such thing as a perfect quilt. Every quilt that I have ever made has had some kind of flaw or error in it. That's just natural. We are human and things are not perfect. And if you look back at quilts that you may have, if you have any from your grandparents, I've got a few from my great-grandmother. She made me a beautiful baby blanket, and not every seam lines up perfectly, and that's okay. Not every stitch is the same size, and that's okay as well. All right, I'm going to continue sewing this, and I'll be back. All right, so I have sewn those two squares together and have knotted it on this side. Now, if you do not have an iron at home, you can finger press your seams, and that's just simply by taking the edge of your nail and rubbing it across the seam to get it to lay flat. This will work fine. Now, if you notice, I'm still keeping the red piece flat, and I'm folding back on the dark gray piece. And you can even use a pencil to help press down the seam. There you go, it's laying nice and flat. So now we're going to bring our next square onto the dark gray square. Trace our 1/4 of an inch seam. And then begin sewing again. And I'll be back when I finish sewing this one together. All right, so I've got my last seam done on the second column. And we're just gonna press this one side flat with our fingers, just so you can see what a finger press is, just in case you don't have an iron at home. So remember, we're laying the red flat and pressing the gray back. And you can also use a pencil or some other type of sturdy, hard object that you can rub across the fabric. And it's going to press down that seam nicely. So now we have 2 of the columns completed. And we're going to get ready to sew the 3rd one together. All right, so for our 3rd column, I'm going to bring the top fabric down again. I'm going to mark my 1/4 of an inch seam again. All right, so I've got my seam marked. My squares are nice and together. Unfortunately though, I do not have enough thread left on my needle, so I'm gonna have to rethread my needle and then get started sewing this one together. I'll come back when I have it finished. All right, so I have this block set sewn together. And remember, I'm folding away from the red. I'm going to use my pencil to mash down that seam real good to get it to lie a little flat. All right, so now I have my bottom piece, and I'm going to bring it up, match up the corners, draw my 1/4 of an inch seam, all right, and I'm ready to sew this one together, and I'll come back when it's finished. All right, so now we have our 3 columns sewn, and we're going to begin to put them together. So we're going to take this one with the green and lay it on top of the middle one. And we're going to look close and make sure that these 2 seams are lining up, because you want them to fit nice and square, okay? And they look like they're lining up very nicely. So before I pin them, I'm going to go ahead and draw my 1/4 of an inch seam on here. That way I can make sure it's nice and even, just like all the others, because that's what makes these 2 squares line up so nicely while we're making this. All right, then I'm just gonna gently hold my ruler and mark each little block with its 1/4 of an inch seam. Now, if you notice, I'm just doing my pencil on this part of the fabric, and then I'm moving to this section to work on it. I'm not gonna try to drag all the way across, because I'm gonna end up pulling the fabric with my pencil and making a crooked line. All right, now this is the part where if you want to use the safety pins to hold it together, this is where I would recommend it. That way your corners in the middle stay nice and together at the correct seam. Okay, and then I'm gonna put one up here, one at the second set where the 2 corners are going to meet. And then last, I'm going to have one hold it right down here. So you should have 5 safety pins in your kit. This only took me 4 pins to make sure that it was going to line up nice and evenly. And we're just going to do a simple straight stitch just like we did before. Make sure you have a decent amount of string that's going to reach all the way across. You're going to tie your knot in the end just like before and weave your needle in and out of the fabric all the way up to the top, and then tie the knot to tighten it and hold it in place. All right, I'll be back as soon as I finish sewing. All right, I now have my seam holding those together. So I am going to iron away from this side. So I'm going to use my pencil to rub down those seams. That way they'll lay flat. All right. Guess that's actually how it's supposed to look. I flipped that over on us. All right, so now we're going to take this last column, lay it on this one. I'm going to mark my 1/4 of an inch seam again, get me some more thread because I don't think I have enough left on this, and I'm going to sew this together, and I'm going to show you what our completed 9 patch is going to look like. I'll be back. All right, everyone, I have sewn together that last seam. We're going to press it flat. That might be the way we were actually working on it. I get it a little turned around, but that's okay. All right, and we have our 9 patch sewn together, and it will be ready for Miss Chelsea to quilt. She will be quilting it Monday, next Monday. So look forward to that video to learn a little bit more on how to finish your 9 patch trivet. I hope you've enjoyed this brief tutorial on sewing your 9-patch for your trivet. I hope you are enjoying this as much as I am. And remember, you do not have to finish this all at once. You can break this down into smaller steps if you need more time. You have a whole week to finish it before Miss Chelsea shows you how to quilt it. And even then, you can watch the videos at any time, so you don't have to finish it when we do. It'd be fun if you did, but you can take your time and work on it as you need to. We look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week.